Welcome to the show, Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain, and I am really excited to have my friend and really a mentor for me in my life's journey as a high performance coach, Natasha, on the show. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honour to be invited and to be here to talk about something that is so vitally important for us all. So thank you.
Oh no, you're most welcome. And just to introduce Natasha, for those that don't know her, she's the founder and managing partner of the international coaching and consulting firm NM Consulting. She's an accomplished transformation coach and consultant and guides high-performing senior executives, C-suite and entrepreneurial specialists and professionals. And she really helps guide her clients to higher outcomes in their role model leadership, sustained high performance, and a congruent professional personal branding. Wow, and that is so important in today's world, particularly with the advent of social media and the importance of presenting ourselves in a way that's really authentic for us.
Absolutely, yeah. And just moving on to this type of platform, 2 years ago, everyone was, if they weren't using Zoom or Skype and with recordings and cameras on, they sure were after March 2020. So yeah, there's been a huge amount of thinking and procrastination around, does working from home mean that we just show up really casually or very unprepared, as we would probably have called it, inappropriate sometimes for how we would show up in an office environment or with others anyway in a building. So yeah, it's been a big topic, and it's actually been a passion of mine my whole life. And because I think how we show up has such a huge impact on how people perceive us. And we do, we've all heard about, whether it's 7 seconds, 3 seconds, 0.5 of a second to make an impression. The impression is actually a judgment, and we might not like it, but ultimately that's what we're all hardwired to do. And it goes back to, probably almost prehistoric times, where we would be looking for weapons and we're kind of scanning people from head to foot. So big passion for mine is how we package ourselves, how we behave, how we communicate. So yeah,
I think that's a really great point to say that we're programmed in to judge people, and it's really ultimately boils down to, is this a friend or a foe? Do we need to put our guard up, or can we feel safe in their presence? And we're having to adapt ourselves to this new environment, which is online, and present ourselves in a way that we are, display ourselves in a way that is making us a friend or not. So I think it's really important that we take that time to think about it in the context of this new social media and platforms that we're being exposed to. So I know you mentioned you're really passionate about it. What is it you're really passionate about going forward in the context of brain health?
I think it's really just, it comes down to growing people. It's about sharing, very much like just being here today, sharing my story. I've had experiences in my life that have spurred me to make different choices, to research new ways of doing things, to learn new skills, to be mentored by amazing people, to ask for help. All of those things and many more have led me to a place where, as I've got older, I feel younger every year. I'm growing myself younger. I'm in a profession, it's a second career, if you like. So I've reinvented my career path. I've become an expert in that field. And for me, it's all about actually sharing all of that. That's where my joy and passion comes from, is seeing other people get fast-tracked by the knowledge and the experience that I have and what I've learned. So yeah.
And I think it's so important that we do share, because so often we feel that our story doesn't matter, but it really does matter to so many people, because that's how we learn. We learn through hearing other people's stories, and we like to hear them, you know, in the context of finding something that's relatable to our journey, so that other people might be able to grow based on our experience.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to explore your journey, but before we do, what does optimal brain health mean for you personally in the context of your life's journey so far?
Yeah, if you'd asked me this 18, 15 years ago, you'd have got a really different answer. And I actually now, because I've kind of become a new version of myself, I can't even begin to guess what I would have said, but it would have been fairly shallow in its response. And now what it means is reflective of my journey. And it's that every day, top of mind, I'm thinking about, and it's the thinking piece that starts it off, is, you know, I'm thinking 4 ways. I'm thinking about my mental health, like where am I in my head? Where am I physically in my body? Where am I emotionally? You know, is there something niggling at me? Is there something in me that's less than resourceful or positive? And I also massively, balancedly think about my spirituality and my connection to something huger than me, and the thing that powers me every day, and make sure that you know, that is very much part of my everyday life. It helps me help others, and it helps others again when sharing stories. So yeah, for me, it's really about the thinking, you know, really getting tuned in with how you're talking to yourself, what pops into your mind, and actually being much more self-aware around what those things might be. And then rather than just taking it as read that those things are normal, actually questioning or resetting them in some way on purpose. Physically, it's about energy. Energy powers my everyday. I worship energy. I'm obsessed with energy and having loads of it. And you know, I'm not proud to say that I'll be 60 next year. And when I said that I'm growing myself younger every year, I really mean that. It's not, you know, a strap line. It's not my marketing. It's actually my life. And I talk about that with a lot of self-pride, because it's been a lot of work and a lot of changes. So physically, that's that piece. And that brings me, I guess, to emotionally. And just really thinking about, I love a quote that I read many, many years ago by Maya Angelou, the poet, and it's well quoted and it's repeated everywhere, which is great, but I actually live by it, and it really struck a chord with me when I read it. And it's something along the lines of, people forget what you say, like verbatim. You can sit in full presence and listen to someone, and you will not remember word for word what people said. You'll also probably forget things that they did, you know, whether they sat or stood or walked, or, you know, whatever they did, picked something up. But the thing you always remember, she says, is how they made you feel. And for me, when I heard that, it was like, that's it. That's what I believe. That's who I am. That's what charges me. So so everything, I can safely say, my intentions are usually driven by how can I either influence a positive change in someone else by showing up, by taking charge and control of how I show up. And more importantly, when I leave, even if it's in a fleeting moment, a bus stop or a grocery store or whatever, that I've left them feeling good about me, that they feel good that they met me, that something I said resonated, or just made them smile and feel better than they did before we interacted. So for me, those pillars are my guiding light every day.
Yeah. You know, I really love that, because obviously you drew upon the 4 quadrants of well-being, which I always talk about with my clients, is looking at your emotional well-being, your physical well-being, your mental well-being, and your spiritual well-being. And you touched on all of those. And I love that also that you mentioned the importance of energy, and the energy that we bring into the room is the energy footprint that we leave behind. And that's really the only, you know, the only footprint we ought to be leaving with people. And it's focusing on the fact that it is a positive footprint that we've left in their lives. And Rex Miller, he is a guest on the show. He also talks about the importance of energy in the context of brain health, and really it being a fundamental. And we know, like, many people talk about well-being or health, but they often miss one of those 4 quadrants. And they don't tap into all 4. They either miss the emotional piece, and they don't spend the time really truly connecting with the emotions that they personally hold inside, that they're obviously exhibiting outwardly to other people. And they focus on what they want to be displaying, but they don't spend the time focusing on what they're actually feeling. And how we are feeling drives our thoughts, and it drives our behaviors, not how we want to feel. We can help, but as long as we've got our cognitive brain connected, our prefrontal cortex, we can decide how we want to feel. But if we haven't got it connected, we'll be driven by our older reptilian brain, which is our emotional centers in our brain. And then often other people don't think about their spiritual well-being as their connection to what they're passionate about and what they find purpose and meaning in their lives. And I love that you've drawn on all 4 of those quadrants. I'd love to dive into those quadrants, if you will, in the context of your life's journey. Because I know you mentioned earlier that, you know, if I talked about brain health 15 years ago, it would have been very different for me. So what's been that shift in that 15-year period, or go back longer if you will?
I think actually it began, I think it was around 18 years ago, where you know, you would have looked at my life, and with the exception of perhaps a divorce, which happened 10 years, just literally 1 month shy of 10 years of marriage, but 3 very young children, and if you know, a really huge challenge, a very uncomfortable, you know, threatening kind of time in my life. And you know, with the exception of that major kind of colossal blip, my life looked, and people would often say this, it's like, oh, it's okay for you, you know, you've got it made, kind of thing. You know, you've got a great job, you're doing really well, you always look lovely, you've got a nice house, your children are sweet and, you know, well behaved, and you have nice friends, you get to travel, you know, all these amazing things that
Judgments.
Literally just labels for things that people see, and that judgment goes on. And I think it's something that everyone listening to this will absolutely agree with, because we see it in life all the time, all day long. You will be around people making what, you know, might sound better but you know, a subtle assumption.
I think
assumption comes in, but ultimately it's all landing in that place of judgment. It's like, what?
And I think, you know, key to this is a person's perception of your life is never your reality. It's never your reality, and they're never going to know your reality unless they actually truly deeply connect with you at an emotional level, and start to care about what your reality is across those 4 quadrants: emotional, physical, mental and spiritual.
Agreed. And you know, the very best friends in the world are often not able to do that for you. So we all travel through life, some of us lucky to have good friends and to share values and passions and beliefs and our work with each other, and I feel massively blessed in that regard. But you know, when I look back to kind of 18 years ago, I was turning 40. Soon after that, I actually met Chris, my husband, and we remarried. I remarried, but my kids were really young. They were under 5. Jasper had just 5. Let's think of the series of events that took place. Turned 40, felt really good about turning 40, had no like, oh God, you know, I'm getting old sort of thing. Didn't really think about it in that way, because energy had always been top of my list. You know, that really was a driver. And I always was the person that had the highest energy. So people were motivated by having me around. So teams at work, you know, the people in my teams always were uplifted by me coming into meetings and kind of driving conversations, those kind of things, which I think many people will kind of relate to. The people with high energy, the people that are still going, a bit like the Duracell battery, you know, it's like the mad monkey or the little bunny at the end of the day. I was still going and still, you know, had time and energy to meet with friends or socialize and so on. But ultimately, my spirituality, my conscious and purposeful thinking about how I was thinking was pretty focused on what great looked like at work, forming in my job, being a good mum, what that meant with the very young family. Yeah, it was really sort of driven into these big chunks of what you think is important, right?
And how were you emotionally?
And emotionally, I was happy. I thought I was happy. I was happy. I was happy looking back in my ignorance of everything that was at my disposal that I couldn't see or know was missing. And that's a really big part of not, you know, anybody listening, please don't listen to my story and think, oh, I need to know more now. It's like our journey is all about really discovering that we don't know what we don't know. That's been a big piece for me, is owning that, like being really happy to admit that I don't know what I don't know. And the older and the more I know, the more I realise.
The wiser, because you can go down.
Yeah, there's just more and more and more that I don't know. And rather than getting depressed about that or think, well, that's a waste of time, you know, self-growth and all of these things, it's like, because you'll never know everything. It's like, that's right. However many billion on the planet, there's not one person that knows it all. And I think that should bring huge comfort to people. So yeah, really, that was a big discovery, but that came kind of later. Really, my life looked, you know, I hate the word perfect, but it did look in many ways perfect to people making those judgments.
And how did it feel to you? Because you talk about people judging it as perfect, but what was it for you personally?
Great question. So it felt really hard.
Okay.
I was, so to explain, it took a year before my 2 senior designers discovered that I'd even been divorced. And we worked really closely together.
Wow.
And they were like so shocked. And I remember taking them for lunch and saying, guys, it's not because I didn't want to share, because we shared a lot together. But it was my way of dealing with 2 very separate parts of my life, being my personal emotion, my personal energy, and just being able to perform. So ultimately survival during that period.
Do you think, so I'd love to dive into this, because I think this is a really important point, is people who are in senior executive roles, which I think you were at the time, is that correct?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Often use activity, particularly business, to avoid the difficult conversations with themselves at a personal level. So their avoidance factor is do more work, you know, perform better, and it will go away, kind of thing. So they're focusing on the physical well-being as an escape from their emotional turmoil they're experiencing at a personal level that maybe is too painful to actually dive into and address. So their solution is flight.
Yes.
And they flight through work.
Absolutely.
Is that what you found happening to you?
Yes, and it's what I find happening to many as I go about the world doing what I do. But absolutely, I did an amazing job at directing my movie, and basically I was the lead female in it, and yeah, I produced this amazing feature film of my life, and all the time, unbeknown to me, my insides that you can't see, all my organs and my central nervous system, my literally my hormone balance, my ability to deal with stress, which was at a very high level all the time, but actually not in my conscious awareness, you know, just literally everything's all right. I was doing in my own life what other people do to come to those conclusions that it's all right for you, kind of thing. It was like, hey, Natasha, sit down. Let me just talk to you. You've still got your job. It's a great job. You're doing really well. You know, I remember being so proud that my team made bonus every year. Like even in the toughest times in retail, we still grew or we maintained market share. And I that's part of what I would have said back then. So it's interesting as you sort of talk about things come out. But I would have said how proud I was if you'd said, what are you proud about at the moment, or what are you passionate about, or whatever. It would be that my team make bonus every year and that I'm able to look after them and they hang around. I have the less attrition in my team and I grow people and so on.
And that's all about your team. So all of that conversation you just replayed was about your team. That's it. And very little of it was about you personally.
And
did you put the oxygen mask on first, or were you putting it on your team?
I was putting it on the team and on my children and on everybody around me. And yeah, and you know, Superwoman doesn't need oxygen masks, you know. It's like I'm great because I've got a lot of energy. So I kept telling myself things that, to be fair, kept me going for a long time. They were fairly good strategies, but there was a horrible awakening, and it really happened probably about 9 or 10 years later, where I actually hit the roadblock that many hit well after huge events have taken place in your life.
Yeah.
It's not an immediate kind of disaster zone health-wise or mentally wise, but it can take a good long time because we are actually hugely resilient, and most of us can overcome modern day challenges like divorce or moving house or changing jobs and so on. But I had the divorce, and then shortly after that I was given a compromise agreement from the company that I've been at for 12 years, and it was nothing to do, literally nothing to do with my performance. It was that the company was actually completely restructuring in a whole different way about how we would deliver clothing to the client, which was Marks and Spencer's. And it was a big overhaul of like structure and direct buying and all sorts of things, which was completely different to how it was set up. But what did I do? I took it personally. it was all about me, right? And that's, again, you know, you look back, I look back on all of that, and it just makes me smile now. I look back with massive fondness of who I was back then, but blimey, did I make it difficult for myself, you know?
And ultimately it's because you didn't put your oxygen mask on, so there was no oxygen to breathe for you to protect yourself, and you know, and go, you went
that's it, yeah, hold your breath and keep holding your breath. And this was also, it was a few years after divorce, as I say, but I had then in between that been keeping a really big job going and a big responsibility at home. I had a daily nanny, I had to live in au pair, you know, I still had to do some travel. Like the pressure, just talking about that, how I look back, and it's kind of like, how did I do that? And
yeah,
and obviously I did it, but it came with a really big cost. So I hadn't dealt with my emotional issues around divorce and the trauma that year had brought. I did actually get a huge flu at the end of that year, where I was in bed for three weeks with respiratory issues and, you know, all the traditional influenza symptoms. And it really knocked me over physically. But that's all that I saw of it, like manifesting from a health
externally.
And then, so I got over that eventually, but it took a month of being super ill, and then probably 3 or 4 months before I really felt like my energy was kind of back where I would expect it to be. And then, like I say, we'll fast forward. So job continued, kids carried on growing, doing well, remarried, and literally hit wall. Like I say, I was on a trip. I was working for a large marketing company at that point, and I was on a trip to Thailand and Vietnam on a sourcing trip. And just before I left, I discovered, we came back from dinner one evening, and in my bathroom, there's a big long mirror. Really not a good idea in bathrooms where you get a long mirror, and I took my top off, as you do. And as I did this, I noticed around my middle, just over my ribs, from the front to the spine at the back, like a whole ring, this horrific rash. And I looked at it, and I don't know why, but I identified it immediately, and it was shingles. So I had shingles. And we'll fast track, because that was an awful period. And I obviously went to the doctor, and they gave me some antivirals to take immediately, which allegedly help with the long-term effects. But sat in the chair and got told, I have a lot of experience of this with the medical profession, but, you know, the post-hypnotic suggestion that given that it's shingles and that it's really, really serious and it's your central nervous system, you should expect, you know, you are likely to have nerve damage for the rest of your life. And as you get older, it will get worse. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not liking the sound of that suggestion. And I'm not going that route, was it in my head.
Yeah.
So even then, and I can absolutely pinpoint that now, I would say that was actually a terrible moment and a dreadful place to be, to get that clarity around actually taking responsibility for what you're thinking and actually getting clear on what you want to think. But I would say that happened 2 or 3 times with not only the shingles, but I was then diagnosed with executive burnout.
Wow.
So I'm going to tell you something that others will, I'm sure, resonate with in corporate world. What did I do? It was probably 2 weeks later. I went on my trip. So I went on my business trip, because the rash had, you know, gone away pretty much. It didn't stay for long, the rash. I just had a couple of little kind of spotty things. but I had convinced myself that I was absolutely better and able to go on the trip because it was really important. So I went on the trip, and whilst I was there, I then extended the trip to have some holiday time, which was the best thing that I'd thought of for a bit. And then it started dawning on me, because I started then looking up what was going on in my body and so on.
Yeah.
I realized that it wasn't just the shingles, was just a bonus. I had full on like burnout and all the things.
10 years worth of stress stacked.
That's it. And then to boot, because things often come in threes, right, Ruth? I then discovered, I came back, and it was probably several months later, but I started having loads of extra undesirable symptoms around my digestion. I wasn't sleeping. The odd headache, which I hadn't had since I was a child. All sorts of like just really unpleasant things that I was living with every day. And I just started to feel like I didn't recognize my own body anymore. It was like, who am I turning into? What is going on? Because
it sounds like your body was shutting down because your mind wasn't listening.
That's it. And
so your body was shouting, stop, stop, stop. I'm having a breakdown.
That's it.
Physically, because mentally you weren't listening to that breakdown that was happening. And so it had to express itself physically.
So the pièce de résistance, you're right, was that I then actually my body went into a forced early menopause.
Wow.
Full on. And by then it was really difficult to actually uncover what was shingles related, what was burnout related, stress burnout related, and what was menopause related, because actually my body was sending so many signals, symptoms of things, that you kind of lose track of, well, where do you even begin, right? And that was the turning point, is where do we begin? Because I did do, what I would have always done back then, and I sought medical advice and what do I do and but again, the response around menopause was to do one blood test on one particular day that was random. It was the day that I went to the hospital to have the blood test at one particular time of the day, which, if you have it in the afternoon, could have given a completely different
result.
Hormone levels. And on that one reading, the doctor, when I went back and she had the results, said, it's not conclusive, but it looks like this is happening, and therefore the route that we can take is X and Y. And of course, one of them was prescription drugs for synthetic hormones. And I sat in the chair and I was like, no, don't really fancy doing that. I'm very young, and I think I've got this. Something in my body was saying, I've got this. It's so, don't go down that route. It's always available to you if you choose to change your mind, but I've got this. So this started, I did have a bone density scan, because I thought that was a wise thing to do, because it had previously been going on for a while. There were other things that had been taking place. But I had the bone density scan. Bones were absolutely fine, really in good shape. So it's like, okay, so if I'm not worried about that, I need to figure out what I need to do to get my body back, my body that works in a particular way.
Yeah, and I just want to interject as it sounds as if, it sounds as if your HPA axis, your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is responsible for managing your stress response and your cortisol flow and your hormonal regulation, was working on overdrive because of the stress that you'd stacked, emotional stress that you'd stacked over a period of time. and your system had got out of balance because it was burnt out.
That's it.
And probably, I don't know if you had your adrenal glands, your levels checked, but maybe they were out of whack as well.
Flat out, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, it's reversible through appropriate intervention that doesn't necessarily require drugs. It's lifestyle intervention, because your lifestyle caused it, so a change to your lifestyle has the potential to fix it. And that's often, you know, drugs are often a good in between to get your system back, but ultimately it's your system that has to do the fighting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And take back control.
Yeah, completely right. And that's exactly where I went. I literally, I think from all the books and everything that I read and studied for myself, I should probably have 2 PhDs, because it wasn't a course or something recognized. And funny how there are no courses for this. And maybe that should be my prompt to create one going forward. But ultimately, literally just went down the Alice in Wonderland hole of looking for information, the things that doctors don't tell you, the things that you can't find readily, speaking to others, reading books that were somewhat, you know, on the kind of tipping point of things, but really around all those 4 things that I now have: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And all 4 of them were wormholes that I went down. And it was so interesting, like one would spur me on to another. And before I knew it, I was studying and doing more around spirituality, for instance. So my connection with higher self, with divine consciousness, with the universe, with God, whatever the word is for everybody out there. But we are connected, we're energy. And, you know, there was never a time more poignant for me to really, really get this than when my poor father passed away 20 years ago now. And it happened very suddenly. He died in his sleep. He was in Spain. He'd left here. They'd been with us for Christmas. And me and the boys had to get on a flight because they bury, and funerals are done very quickly in Spain. So we didn't have a lot of time to think. But this poignancy around energy and spirituality for me was huge, because in Spain, again, it's very normal to have the body laid out so that you can go and see the body and you can speak to the person and, you know, just say your goodbyes, really, with the body there. And we turned up at the undertaker's where he was being kept, and literally seeing my father laid it in a coffin, it was like, wow. I thought I was going to be super emotionally upset and, you know, just all about the loss. But actually, I'd had that already, and then continued to have that in my grief of my loss for him. But ultimately, what I got in that moment was, oh my goodness, it's my dad's body, but he's not there. It's like, and I got this just pure clarity of the essence of who he is has gone, but we know energy can't be destroyed. So there was something really clear for me that his body had died, without a doubt. I'm not crazy, but he still lived on, and I knew that in my heart. I knew it with every cell in my body, and that really spurred me to discover more about what that meant for me and what resonated for me. And it's been a wonderful journey of discovery and unpacking more and more of me that has congruently found things from when I was a child, things that I used to be. And this is a really interesting concept of actually really being able to connect not with just your body and your mind and so on, but actually the very essence of who you are, and getting really comfortable with that, and to the point where you can say out loud publicly what I'm going to say, which is, I actually love myself. And it's so hard to get to that place for many people. And believe me, I sit with many that are amazing and will tell you all the things I've told you about how actually on the surface their lives look perfect and they're high performers and they're successful, but they don't love themselves.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and thank you for sharing the story with your dad, because it obviously was an incredible spiritual journey to get to where you are now, which is giving yourself permission to love yourself. And I think sometimes we don't do that. We don't take the time to love ourselves and think about what that love really means for us personally, because it's different for everybody. I'd love to do a quick interject and continue your journey.
Yes.
I love to go to the fun facts.
Go on then.
To talk about the 5 pillars of brain health in a fun way. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So let's pick the first one, feelings, because that was so important to you. What's really the funniest or most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you?
Funniest or most embarrassing?
Either or, whatever you want to go with.
I was embarrassed because I was on a ski holiday with my uncle, my mum's brother, and he's a crazy man and I love him to pieces, my uncle Alberto, or Tito, and he's a great skier. And the two of us, I was quite young, I was probably late teens, I'm guessing. And he'd already been, it was in La Plagne in France, and he'd been there for the week prior to me arriving. And he skied the black runs and stuff. He was like a really, really good skier. And of course, I'm fresh into skiing for the following year. I went the year before, but literally 1 week a year. So you're not greased into skiing. But on
not an expert in 1 week a year, are you?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a pretty good skier, but I'm not, I would never purport to, it's like day one, let's do all the black slopes today. I like to kind of, I don't know, gear myself up and start to feel confident again that I've got this. Anyway, he decided we were going to go over the other side of the Roche de Millau and down the other side where the runs are called things like the kamikaze. I mean, that tells you everything, right? One of them is called the kamikaze. But anyway, when you get to the top and you go over the glacier, the other way of the mountain, there are 2 routes, and he took the one to the left. And basically, we came to this, what I can only call a very narrow precipice that literally you could barely stop. Even snow plowing was really hard. We turned the corner. You're going fast, you realise it's really narrow, and there is a sheer drop to the right.
Wow.
Loads of people stood with their skis hanging over the edge, right? So the edge is like this, and people are on it with their skis over, ready to take the plunge and head over the edge. So you don't want to knock them over. It's like a horrible scene of people bowling, right? You could literally smack into the first one and literally take them all out.
It's like domino effect.
Yeah, it was like literally my heart was beating so fast I thought my chest was going to like explode. I literally went into a cold sweat. I genuinely could see this playing out of me like literally knocking all these people over, and my legs, because adrenaline was pumping now, I was in absolute terror.
My
legs were, yeah, exactly, frozen legs, literally. And nothing I did was slowing me down. Like the legs just weren't doing what I wanted them to do. But literally, I did get to stop. But it was almost, God knows what noise I was making, because I was probably like, oh my God. It certainly was doing that in my head. Anyway, I got to stop and I was literally shaking. Like I had the ski poles and I was like this, because I could see where we were going to go and where he had decided it would be fun to ski that day. So I stopped and I had my skis over the edge, and literally looking over your skis down, it was just a sheer drop.
Oh my goodness.
Literally come off and literally flip your skis sideways to literally try and get some kind of resistance as you're turning to just slow yourself down and not be the human bullet down the mountain. So literally I was like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And my uncle's like, Natasha, shut up. It's like, you've got this. It's like, you're fine. It's like, Tasha, he's French, by the way. So instead of Natasha, it would be, Tasha, you know, for God's sake, stop. Just keep it quiet. And just, so then he just went. He was like, literally didn't read my terror, my embarrassment, my shame of like being there, and that I was going to die. I was literally, I'm going to die, and he'll be at the bottom of the mountain. So I have to say that one, I have many, but that one really came out as, it was embarrassing at the time, it was traumatic at the time, and it is the funniest thing now looking back.
And what did you do?
I went. I counted in and literally faced death. It was there, and I was like, I've got to do this. I can't go back. I can't take the skis off. It's that whole thing in skiing. If anyone,
you were trapped.
It's like there's nothing you can do. And even taking your skis off, we were so far away from anywhere. Like I could never have walked down. It was like, you know, several miles of ski run, and I went for it.
Did you survive it okay? Didn't end up with an injury at the bottom or head trauma or anything?
I think it definitely landed another load of trauma that I had to clear out of my body at that point, because I was petrified. I literally petrified. But yeah,
and this is a very common thing, you know, in skiing, that people who are expert skiers take very much beginners or not experts on runs that are well above their capability, often on the first day, because it's almost like, look at me, I'm so good, without taking any cognizance of that other person's ability. And the person is terrified for life. Maybe damaged for life because they've had a major accident, physically and mentally, emotionally.
I mean, it ended up, you know, I got to the bottom and it was like, blimey, I did it, you know. And that was another kind of part of the story of like how something, you know, literally not entirely listening to the voice in your head can play out. And actually my uncle was right, I could do it, you know. But actually, you know, at the time it was so many emotions playing out all together, and then you get to the bottom and you're just relieved. Actually, there was no pride, there was no like, yeah, I did it, there was no celebration. It was like, you
survived it, not did it.
I survived, and I was just so grateful to not have a broken limb, not being helicoptered off the mountain, all of those things. But funny as well, because my uncle is really good company and we had a great laugh about it. But
I'm pleased you can look back at it with some humour, because many people can't, you know, in the context of doing things like that from a skiing perspective, which is such a dangerous sport. I mean, I do skiing, but it's a dangerous sport from a brain health perspective for all of those reasons.
And I should say at this point that my family have worn helmets, casquette in France, for years, well before people wore helmets. We were sort of the odd ones out for a long time, and then slowly, you know, more and more people were wearing helmets. But you'll still see people going skiing with a bobble hat on. Holy moly, it actually makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to ski anywhere near them. I'm so aware of the risk they're taking. It's uncomfortable.
So I'd love to ask the next question on actions, because we talk a lot about your actions. So this is the second pillar, but what's the most rewarding or fulfilling thing you've ever done?
It's ongoing. It's my children. Without a doubt, it is bringing them up, being their mum, just so proud they picked me.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the relationship that we now have, you know, the most rewarding thing has been watching them grow and develop as individuals, but as a family unit as well, and their relationship with each other and their ongoing relationship with me. I'm blessed that, you know, I have a 28-year-old and twins of 25. And we have really great relationships. So
And I love that you brought your kids into that, because we talk so much about your work life and that drive or that passion that you had, you know, in the workplace that was so important. But ultimately, it boils down to family.
Yeah,
it's the most important, most fulfilling thing in your life,
without a doubt.
So let's dive back to your family then, and we left off with you. Obviously, you had this spiritual experience from witnessing your dad in the coffin, and you were going through this awakening, as it were, on how to take back control of your brain health and well-being. And you touched briefly on the 4 pillars of 4 quadrants of well-being. What was the biggest needle mover for you? What was the sort of catalyst to take back control for you when you went on that journey?
I would say it was ownership, like taking full responsibility, becoming, I would say 3 words: becoming totally self-aware, and then taking ownership for where I was, you know, with no blame, no judgment, just here I am, and this can't remain like this. And I'm certainly not going to take the post-hypnotic suggestions that it's my age, it's because I'm a woman, it will get worse, you know, all of those things. No to all of those. That just didn't feel right. My intuition was kicking in massively. And then the third one is then the responsibility, and bringing that responsibility into all your choices every day. It's not, set a plan and then see how often you get a touch point on it when you feel like it. No, this was, I need to do something differently in many areas of my lifestyle and my life choices in order to actually, like you say, reverse the damage, but heal the damage, and then literally build a new me physically, clear out and deal and manage and respect a lot of emotional trauma and damage there. And I think the biggest one really initially was around food. So what I was consuming. And I started to I read loads around different things that really help with hormonal balance. And hormones were where I really kind of focused, because ultimately they run everything. They are our wonderful internal pharmacy. And they prescribe and they dose and they microdose sometimes, and they do all sorts of things.
Well, decide what energy you have.
That's it. So that was my main focus, was how do I get better hormonal balance to deal with the stress damage, my adrenals, the symptoms I was having of early menopause, and just emotional trauma and so on. And actually more as well, the physical changes that were going on in my body. Like I started to put some weight on around the middle, which is a sure sign of, you know, estrogen dominance, for instance.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, what is happening to my body? So nutrition, and it started, for those of you that are out there and are going to think, well, what should I do to change something? It started with one day taking out tea and coffee, and as a result, because I used to drink lattes, so I had a lot of milk. As a result, I cut out for that day dairy as well. So I thought, okay, so no milk, no coffee, no tea. And I did it for a day, and I was quite busy, and you know, I sort of set my mind to it. And before I knew it, I did 3 days, because one day was actually quite easy. And then I got a humongous detox headache because I hadn't had coffee for 3 days. That lasted a whole weekend. It was awful. Literally.
I had this when I was pregnant. I came off coffee. I had a headache for a week, pretty much.
Yeah, literally. And all I dreamt about was being able to remove my head and put it in a nice warm bath or something just because there was no way. You can't shift it. You know, you can't take a paracetamol or something. Nothing will touch it, because it's not a headache. It's literally a reaction. Yeah, it's detoxing. So I did that for the 3 days, and then didn't have any more, obviously, for another 3 or 4 days as the headache. And then I woke up and it had gone, and I was like, oh my gosh, thank the Lord, it's disappeared. And then realized, well, that's me off black tea and coffee then, because I'm never going through that again. So tea and coffee gone. And I'd also...
Did you go off milk as well? Did you cut out dairy?
Yeah.
Which is a huge inflammatory, which many people miss. You know, it's often the first thing that you need to remove from your diet if you're having an inflammatory response is to cut out dairy, because of the casein morphines that are developed in your gut, in your stomach, that then go and travel to your brain and start blocking your communication channels in your brain and acting as a morphine in your brain.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend that. I'm still off dairy, and by now it must be 8-9 years that that happened. So literally dairy went. Dairy, I stayed off red meat. So I took red meat out of my diet. I actually didn't eat a lot of like steak as such, or like Sunday roasts and what have you, but I did, because I have a Spanish upbringing, eat a fair bit of like salami and chorizo and serrano ham, and we would always have that in the fridge.
Yeah.
And so I literally took that out for a good while. And with all of these things, as I did them, I kind of thought, I'm going to do 3 months. I'm going to do the 90-day. Because there's no point saying, oh, I'll be off it for a week and see how I feel. Your body, what I really learned was that your body needs much longer to be able to clear this, really cleanse it out of your body. And for your body, like, you don't crave it. I was really surprised how quickly cravings, if that's really a thing, actually wear off. That goes fairly quickly.
Yeah, actually, your taste buds change in 6 days. It's about a 6-day turnaround to change your taste buds, so it's not long at all. If you're, you know, with the taste addiction that you might have, that's obviously signaling to your brain that you need to have more.
Exactly.
It's quite quick, as you say.
Yeah, it's shockingly quick, because I remember, you know, years ago, again, you know, if you'd asked me the question, I would have said, I don't do water. I just drink coffee and red wine and gin and tonic. I mean, literally, those words would have come out of my mouth 20 years ago. And that's the other thing, the big one. I was chronically dehydrated.
Wow.
Literally chronically dehydrated. I barely drank water.
Yeah, and it's such an important thing for your brain function, because our brain is completely dependent on water, and if we're slightly dehydrated, it has a huge impact on our performance
and our health. Like, you know, all that stress on a dried up body. I mean,
well, you're basically amplifying the toxins, because they're not being diluted anyway.
Absolutely. It's really, with everything I've come to experience and know about my body and health, my nutrition choices, you know, I actually don't know how. I'm so grateful that I was kept alive during that period, because I'm sure I was, you know, somebody was looking after me for sure.
Wow. And
yeah.
during that period, did you manage to reverse the menopausal?
Yes. So first off, menopause symptoms, I lost the bit of extra that I was putting on around my middle. That changed almost immediately. I would say within the first few weeks, I noticed that. My sleep absolutely started to change, but definitely noticed improvements there. But that really changed when I took gluten out.
Yeah, which is the second pro-inflammatory, which has a huge impact on our brain health as well.
So gluten was a really big one because it's in virtually everything that you buy or can eat. So I did cold turkey on gluten, and I took myself to Whole Foods in Kensington and I filled a trolley with alternative foodstuffs that would allow me to cook meals that I recognise in the house, but with no gluten. It cost me a fortune, that first filling of the cupboards, but ultimately it meant that I wasn't looking at traditional things that I would have used, choices I would have used around food. And that makes it so much easier because...
Yes, it's about swapping rather than dropping.
Yes, I love it. I love that. Yes, definitely. So definitely did that. So gluten, caffeine, mainly coffee and black tea. I now drink green tea. I love green tea.
And actually, caffeine, just for those that are listening, restricts blood flow to the brain. It is good for your brain health to a certain degree. The coffee, but the actual caffeine itself is not healthy for our brain in large quantities at all, because it restricts blood flow, and blood flow is the number one imaging predictor of Alzheimer's disease. So we definitely don't want to be creating a toxic looking brain by consuming vast volumes of caffeine.
Exactly. So lots of layers to this, but yeah, the nutrition has remained, and as we speak today, I do eat fish and seafood. I don't eat it every single day. Definitely don't have meat at all because I moved to just white meats. Eventually I introduced some cheeses back in eventually, and they were mainly sheep and goat cheeses, but then after a while of actually being on those as an alternative, the swapping out, it was like, actually I'm not gonna eat these at all. And I do have vegan cheeses. There's an amazing shop that I'm happy to call out here called the Faux-Margerie, and it's in Shoreditch. And they literally procure and make the most incredible fake cheese with cashew nuts and what have it, and they are amazing. So I don't feel like I've lost out on cheese anymore because it's caught up. You know, there's people doing amazing things, really creative around vegan kind of options.
And do you know, I want to interject, if you don't mind, is I love that, you know, you started your journey when we started the conversation, really focusing on your physical well-being as an escape mechanism from the emotional, mental turmoil and spiritual turmoil you're in from your life circumstances. And actually we've come now to you're focusing on your physical well-being and the foods that you eat and the lifestyle that you're adopting to optimize your emotional, your mental and your spiritual well-being by really using food as medicine, because food is either medicine or food is poison for our mind and body, depending on what we're feeding it and what we need. And you really dialing in on leveraging the power of food that we don't do enough of, to help you take back control of your well-being.
Yeah, like spot on all of that. And I would say it's when you do that consistently, and that's part of this isn't, oh, I do it Monday through Thursday and then the weekend
binge on the weekend.
And yeah, it's like, it's a lifestyle choice. It's the long term, and that, that can seem brutal when you're entering into it, but that's why I shared that, the journey started with just taking tea and coffee out for one day. Everybody can do one day with something. And that whole point around the cheeses, I came off everything just to see how it would improve potentially how I felt and how my body worked, and it did. But I felt that the cheese was just one thing too far. So I brought back in some cheese for a little while, but I did sheep's cheese and goat's cheese, which tends to have less antibiotics in it and less steroids. And
it's actually A2 as well. It's a different format of milk, of structure of the protein compared to cow's cheese. Most of the cow's milk and stuff in Europe is A2, but in the US it can be A1, which is a different configuration, which is why they have greater allergies in the US tend to, from a milk perspective, because the protein configuration is different and we're more sensitive to it. I'd love to know what would be, because this show's all about brain health and unchaining your pain, what would be your one piece of advice for anybody who is struggling physically with their well-being, and they've gone to the doctor and they know something isn't quite matching up to what they know intuitively is wrong? What would your one piece of advice be to anyone?
So number one, it's get in touch with your intuition. Like, literally become much more self-aware. Sit down with yourself. Maybe take even yourself off for a weekend, book to go somewhere, or get yourself out in nature and just explore the question around, what do you really feel about your own body and your own health? And does something or anything that others might be telling you not feel right? And if it doesn't feel right, trust it, because we have an incredible power of cutting through everything, and our subconscious just linking with intelligence that we can't even begin to imagine. And I've experienced a lot of that now, and I meditate, I do all sorts of, I'm out in nature regularly, lots of things that I do, but ultimately get in tune with your body, and write down what comes to mind around what is maybe not feeling right, and then take this podcast, this conversation, take it and translate it into whatever will most spur you on to literally just take ownership of your amazing body, because we only get one, and really take responsibility for what happens from today onwards, the choices you can make, the things you can research, the changes you can make, however small, are going to take you in a direction that is going to improve how you feel and how your body works. That would be my,
great piece of advice. And I think it's so important, because intuition, it gathers information that we can't necessarily put into words, but it's the whole system it takes in and tells us that something is off. And it's really important that we do tune into that, because it gathers more information than just our vocabulary can articulate. So thank you so much for sharing that. And also really want to thank you for sharing your journey on discovering the power of food as medicine in reversing the health struggles you were experiencing, which I think is such an important topic, and we really don't give it enough credence in the well-being world, to leverage the power of food to really help us. Natasha, how can people get hold of you to find out more about what you do?
So, well, we do lots of things, but I spend a lot of time coaching, as you know. Lots of fabulous high performers in many different ways. Best place is probably to find us via our LinkedIn business page. I think you'll be sharing our web domain, but we are very much the secret weapon for all our clients. So we don't actually have an active website. So don't be surprised if it takes you to stay in touch kind of thing. But I would love to hear from anybody who's interested in taking the conversation forward and would like to hear more. So they would be the best places. We also have a Facebook page too, so you can find us on Facebook if you're there and not on LinkedIn.
Oh, Natasha, thank you for sharing your powerful story, and do get in touch with Natasha. She is a force for good, a very knowledgeable individual who just knows so much about so many aspects of brain health and well-being, and how to really truly be a high performer over the long term. Natasha, thank you so much for joining me on the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. Remember, you are not stuck with the brain you have the power to make it better, and we're here to show you and tell you how.
To you by WINJECT Studios. We are an all-in-one educational platform for podcasters that revolutionizes how hosts leverage content to increase engagement with listeners, downloads, and income. We come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how you can interact directly with our hosts, access exclusive live content with offers you can't get anywhere else from our official partners, join our purpose-driven community by visiting www.winject.com. If you're ready to build a career doing what you love, then we're ready to see you there.